Well, hey folks, it's your old pal, King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. As some of y'all who've been paying attention would know, recently I've been kind of more of a fully exploring Dark Sun. Made a bunch of characters to kind of get a feel for what his character creation feels like, and now moved on into the world of actual specific adventure design, trying to write a first level adventure for Dark Sun. The campaign set recommends for players to start off at third level and to have multiple backup characters already rolled up so they can switch out in between adventures or if one of them falls. And as I'm starting to sketch this out, I can see why. Going as much as possible purely on just what's like listed in this book in terms of what kind of fauna is to be found in the wilderness, and going on the premise that you know as with most D&D style games where you're starting off as low level first level characters, want to have the characters start off in a relatively isolated small location like a town, even though Dark Sun doesn't really have quaint little towns and villages in quite the same way that like Forgotten Realms or Mystara and such would have. For this, I've kind of done two different outlines, but using a lot of the same basic keystone concepts. As for two different optional start points, one using the Village of Salt view, which is a much more isolated location and is a village hidden away from the main cities, where a bunch of escaped slaves have basically founded a colony, and they use it as a base to conduct raids themselves on the nearest of the cities that they have access to. And the alternate one is Grax Pool, which is an oasis fortress that's along one of the major trade routes between Balak and Tyr and all them. And it's controlled by a half-elf named Grak, hence the name, and it's, just like a small little kind of fortified setting for characters who are maybe more like a mercenary, professional warrior kind of types. The premise for both of them is going to be the same, though. Either a local kid or a local soldier at the fortress had shot and killed an area Croca, and whoever's in charge of the village and/or the fort's a bit spooked by that because whatever, make up some BS about how it's bad luck to kill an Aarakocra in that region. They have a huge expanse of territories, and so the Aarakocra comes from some relatively nearby mountain range that the characters are going to have to take the body back to, along with whoever it was that shot the Aarakocra, to offer them as like a offering of peace, so that the Aarakocra don't declare war on the village or the fort, kind of a thing. Depending on which one you choose, though, you get a bit of a different kind of length of journey over land. But by doing this, it's introducing Dark Sun to players. So, like, the first primary thing you want to get across to people who are new to Dark Sun, I would think, is just the environment itself before you want to get into all the weird city politics and the stuff about the Sorcerer Kings and so on and so forth. You just want to just hammer in just the harshness of the environment and what kind of whack stuff is to be found in there. So created up some smaller random encounter tables based off the encounter tables they have in here are not really formatted by levels. So I went through and basically pruned out everything that had 3 hit dice or less and left them in the tables. And then did one stronger creature out of each kind of environment to have as this is the lethal encounter that you have to run from. Most of the other encounters should be things that you can handle, and then there'll be one friendly encounter with whatever kind of local race would be potentially found in that region. And so the Salt View, you get a bit more environments. They'd have to cross some rocky barrens and then some salt flats and then come across an oasis and then go through some more rocky badlands before they can get up into the mountains and find the Aarakocra. From Grax Pool, it's more of an immediate jump. You got to cross some stony barrens, go through some rocky badland, foothills, and then up into the mountains and then back. Both try to pop a little point where you might have a little side quest dungeon going on, either up in the mountains with the Grax Pool one or this insect colony that's near the oasis in the Salt View quest. The problem is when after kind of just mapping out, okay, here's just the basics of the encounters, and then I'm gonna go through and actually nail down what actually is there in the encounter. So go through all the various creatures, just gonna randomly generate the size of the group based on the number of appearing stuff that you find in the monster manual and all that. And that's where the problem began, because suddenly encounters were like way ballooning up, not just in terms of lethality, but also like just in like the amount of XP rewards necessary. You know, if there's one thing I do like about fourth and fifth edition design from the Dungeon Master side is there is kind of like a focus on trying to have adventures that will at minimum level a character up, level up the whole party. It's a bit harder to do with the older AD&D and basic style D&D characters and a lot of the OSR games, because they give you a much larger chunk of experience you have to march up to. And so, like, you have a party of 3, and they each need to, you know, have earned an average of, like, between 1,500 and 2,000 XP each. You're having to, like, potentially put up you know, somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 XP worth of villains for them to somehow fight and gain XP off of. If there's one advantage that Basic has over Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is, this might be controversial to some people, is the fact that it has XP rewards for treasure gained. That dramatically cuts down the amount of creatures you have to put your characters up against. You know, D&D is lethal. You don't get a standard maximized hit points when you start off with. You are supposed to randomly roll them, as you're supposed to randomly roll all your other characters, you know, aspects. So you can get stuck with a fighter with only 2 hit points. And Dark Sun doesn't have much in the way of like low-level, less than 1 hit die kind of creatures running around. And so yeah, like going just purely off of how AD&D is set up to just randomly generate encounters using information off encounter tables and then using like the entries in the monster manual, you like can easily balloon up into stuff that like there's no way that the player characters, especially at beginning level, are going to be able to get through this. Like generally then you should have to basically manual go back and hack down you know, all the encounters that involve creatures that are more than 1 hit die. You know, like the 3 hit die creatures that they run into, they should probably only maybe run into 1 at a time, and then use that as kind of like a capping point to figure out how, like, what kind of XP limit you want to put on the overall encounters for the other encounters that involve multiples of creatures. And that sort of thing. You know, I guess there is like an alternate. You can use hit dice overall to kind of also judge, you know, like 1 hit die worth of creature, you know, per the amount of hit die that the player characters have, should generally, you know, kind of be a good hallmark for figuring out what's like a balanced, potentially lethal, but potentially winnable encounter. You can dial it down. So it kind of depends. So you got 3 or 4. We're going to go with 4. We got 4 first level characters. So that basically gives you 4 hit dice worth of creatures. So either they could all go up against 1 creature that's 4 hit die, and they're all attacking it together in tandem, and they're just facing the one thing. Or you can give them up to 4 1-hit die creatures to go up against. Or if you have creatures that are less than 1 hit die, potentially, I guess, like something around 8 or 10 maybe, depending on what we're talking about here. That could be another way to approach it. Having not like delved as thoroughly through the 2nd edition DMG quite as much as I have the more modern ones, like, you know, I'm not sure how much of you know, the stuff I'm encountering is kind of dealt with in that. I'm just kind of, you know, just applying just my own personal principles of adventure design that have, you know, their current incarnation have definitely been shaped by 10 years plus of modern Wizards of the Coast D&D in one shape or another. But like, yeah, I'm finding just like using it as is, like I'm gonna have to go back through all these encounters now and like way dial it down, and just in order for there to be any chance for the characters to survive, even with like the more dialed up, powerful Dark Sun characters. And I imagine that this would apply pretty much to other D&D settings in many much the same ways, depending on what all you're having out there for your encounters. In general, though, just like on principle, I do still kind of recommend this kind of formatting. If you're going to be doing any kind of like overland missions, you'll have a few specific set piece encounters that you'll kind of design by hand to feature whatever your main villain or some sort of event to portray, you know, like the drama of why the characters need to stop whatever's going on and so, blah, blah, blah. But in terms of like when crossing environmental zones, I try to like have a bit more narrowed random encounter. I'll let the player, whichever player is acting as the head of the group or whoever has like the highest session initiative, or any, and whatever the dynamic you want to use. You know, like it won't always be the same person, hopefully every session, but you'll have like one person be designated for that session to like roll the encounters when they're journeying across land. So it's kind of on them if they roll the lethal encounter, or if they get the ones that are a bit more easy to handle, or if they get no encounter, or if they run into something potentially friendly. Like you want, basically my thing is I'll generally have use it like a D6 kind of format, where the 6 there's no encounter. 1 will be your lethal encounter that's, you know, appropriate for that kind of environment. 2 of them will be also like creatures that are more, you know, level appropriate for the player characters, that are, you know, like appropriate for the environment. There'll be 1 creature that would come from a neighboring type of environmental zone. Like say you're making a chart for foothills, you'll have like either 1 grassland or 1 mountain kind of animal that might be wandering around that they encounter. And that basically is it. You can still, if you even want, use the tables they provide in the various books for their random encounters, which are more open-ended. You can still randomly roll on them to figure out what you want to put on your smaller list. But by making a smaller list, you can then pre-map out the basic details of what the treasure might be found with that encounter, how many of them are there. Go ahead and, like, you know, gives you a chance to kind of pre-figure out what kind of tactics they might use, or what kind of scenario it might be for if that encounter gets randomly rolled. That way you're prepared, you know, regardless of what it happens, but it creates this more random feeling that the players feel like they've had some sort of input on. You know, like I said, like it's a bit of a sleight of hand. It's creating the illusion that like they're like, you know, anything can happen, but you're really like focusing and controlling exactly what it is that they're randomly determining. So like the main points are, you want to make sure though that the stuff that you're using, that they're encountering, you want to save things that are exotic, like for special occasions, especially for early on adventuring. You want to, like, the character, every encounter that characters have, whether it's a combat encounter or a social encounter in a city or some other kind of civilized environment, you're portraying what normal is in this world to your players by how you set up these encounters. And so, you know, later on levels, after they've gotten used to what things feel like, sure, bring in some of the more weirder stuff from the deeper parts of whatever setting you're using. But at the very beginning, you just want to establish what normal life is. And so, like, you don't want to use the more outlandish monsters. Like I said, that you'll have 1 lethal encounter that should be, you know, pretty much apparent as soon as, you know, you tell them they've run into this thing. It's like, oh shit, we need to turn around and get out of here, because there's no way that we're going to win this if we try to stick it out at all. It's just going to take us all down one by one. Those are the occasions where you might lose 1 player character, you know, on the random encounter. But, you know, you will also want to, like, have it set up in your own encounter notes so that, like, should the characters wisely choose to haul ass and get out of there, the thing's not going to pursue them down to the death and kill them anyway. You know, you don't want to, you know, as much as, like, the whole hobby is dependent upon his presence and having, like, been there at the beginning of all this, like, if I have a serious complaint about Gary Gygax, is that a lot of his adventures had stuff that, especially Tomb of Horrors, had you know, stuff in there that was just like player traps that they just can't get out of. They're not really presented with a choice or any options. It's just bam, you're dead, or bam, you've lost all your clothes, or all that kind of stupid BS, which I wish hadn't been there from the get-go. And so you yourself, don't be a dick about that. You want the player characters to succeed. They need to feel like it's a challenge. Otherwise, you could just sit here and narrate to them the whole time and never roll any dice or let them have any choices. They need to feel a sense of accomplishment, so it needs to be challenging. But you want them to win, because if they're never going to get to see your big final set piece or learn all your background plots after they're able to finally capture the bad guy and interrogate him, they're never going to get there if you've wiped them out in some random wilderness encounter. So even though you should include at least 1 encounter that is, like, specifically like this is over your heads and lethal, you should make sure that they have a way to get out of that. Also, alternatively, you could, like the one I ended up doing with this one is in the very first zone when crossing the initial bit of Stony Barrens, one of the creatures they can run into is a Braxat, which is like this huge hulking chitinous reptilian rhinoceros thing that's psychic and can talk and all this kind of stuff. And that's like a 5,000 XP monster to throw at them. And like, so like it could be easily obvious, kind of like a just total party kill kind of scene can go on with that. But I was thinking of using it more in like a storytelling kind of fashion, where like, yeah, it could like, you know, wipe them all out and threatens to, but maybe it'll let them pass if they go off and bring it something else, that like a special treat. Or in particular for with this adventure, maybe its initial demand is give me the body of that bird. I'd like to eat that. And then they gotta like, well, do we fight this thing? We can't just give it the body of this guy. Our whole point of doing this is to take this body back to his people. And then then you can have almost like a little side quest where they got to go hunting for some sort of like weird desert deer or whatever you pull out of your ass for that. But anyway, I guess, yeah, those are just some of my thoughts of having to like start to begin to like write kind of just a random cross-country Dark Sun adventure, and how that might also just kind of apply to other AD&D stuff in general. So, I don't know, do with it as you will. Have a good one. Stay comments. Leave a waspinator in the description box below, and subscribe, like, and follow.